My name is Anna Wójcik. I'm a journalist covering the rule of law for OKO.press, a Polish politics portal. And it is my pleasure to chair a very timely discussion on the rule of law and EU funds today. And without further ado, I will start by presenting the stellar panelists. First, Professor John Morrow, who is law and politics professor at University of Groningen in the Netherlands, and also a very well-known rule of law defender who's been very engaged in the topics of judicial independence and the media pluralism and freedom in especially Poland and Hungary. So he's a great friend to Poland, so I hope we can meet him with an applause. Then attorney at law Paulina Kieszkowska-Knapik, one of the co-founders of Free Courts Initiative, one of the most important civil society, actually the most important civil society initiative that is active in defending rights of judges and prosecutors in Poland. And she's also an expert in healthcare and pharma law, fighting for the rights of patients since many years. Professor Alberto Alemanno is professor at the Paris Business School and also lectures at the College of Europe. He is co-founder of the Good Lobby Profs, a network of outstanding legal scholars from all over the world who are interested in doing public interest work. And Professor Alemanno also does a lot of public interest work. You can follow him on Twitter. It's a lot to cover in the introduction. And lastly, our guest, a well-known professor, Wojciech Sadurski, who is joining us from Australia, where he is a professor at University of Sydney. And he's a very prolific author, most recently of 2 books. The first one is titled Poland's Constitutional Crisis, and was translated to Polish as Polski Kryzys Konstytucyjny, and it was published by Liberté. And most recently, The Pandemic of Populists. Welcome, Professor. So the topic that we will cover today is actually making headlines in Poland and Hungary, especially since a couple of months. Over the past decade, first in Hungary, then in Poland, we have seen an unprecedented crisis of EU values in European Union's member states. And since quite recently, the European institutions have started using various financial leverages. And today, the gravity of the discussion, the center of the discussion over the rule of law preservation within the Union has moved towards certain financial instruments. But to start our conversation, I would like to first ask Professor Sadurski to briefly explain why actually current autocratic governments or governments with autocratic mindset attack judicial independence, and what is the link with the EU funds and with the corruption in this process. Please take the floor.
Dziękuję bardzo. I understand I'm supposed to speak. What I'll do. Well, the problem which you raise is particular. Sweden and in Italy show. On the other hand, we should perhaps put it in a certain perspective because there have been also some important spectacular defeats by right-wing populists, leaders such as Babiš in Czech Republic, or Janša in Slovenia, or Borisov in Bulgaria. They were voted out of office. So we can see that right-wing populism is not completely entrenched, but Poland and Hungary are special cases because these are the only two member states of the EU in which the ruling populist leaders and parties managed to quite thoroughly dismantle the fundamental structures of democracy, and in particular the fundamental structures of the rule of law, with the judicial independence as its sort of epicenter. So why is it so dangerous? It's dangerous of course, for the nations of these two countries, because this authoritarian rule becomes entrenched and consolidated, and it becomes more and more in each next electoral cycle for democratic parties to win the elections. But it's also very dangerous for the European Union as a whole. It's sort of existential threat to the Union, which, if is based fundamentally on the values of the rule of law. The EU is a union of law more than of anything else. And there is a true danger of sort of imitation, of copycat effect with these two states, which sadly wouldn't have been accepted into the union today if they applied, but they are inside, and they sort of contaminate the union, or at least risk contamination of the union with the breaches of the rule of law. So you raised the issue of the funds, of the financial instruments that the union has. Perhaps that's the point at which we should unbundle these two cases, Poland and Hungary. In case of Hungary, the threat to the budget, in the case of to the EU budget, or to what's called sound financial management, is very direct because of the rampant corruption of the state. Corruption which sort of goes from the very top, from the prime minister, his family, and his acolytes. And obviously, as we have already seen, the Commission has all the right and the duty to withhold dispensation of funds to Hungary because of that. Poland is slightly different, because it may seem that the threat to the sound financial management, to the financial interests of the Union, is somewhat more indirect. It's more generalized. It's the very fact that, for example, the prosecutor's office is completely under control of the minister, and that the judges are very much in a vulnerable situation, and if they take decisions which are not popular for the government, there are all sorts of ways of disciplining them. This also, although it's indirect, it also poses threat to the Union, as was clearly indicated in a landmark judgment of the Court of Justice of the European Union on the 16th February, when it said that concerning the regulation on conditionality and the dispensation of funds, that the very fact of breaches of judicial independence is per se danger and threat to the legitimate interests of the Union. And for these reasons, I can anticipate that we are yet to see the moment in which the situation in Poland will improve to the point in which those funds will be able to be dispensed.
Paulina, you have been active in the rule of law defense in Poland for many years right now. So how has the EU strategy evolved during that time from your point of view? And where do you see the EU funds cuts or a threat thereof in this new strategy that we are seeing?
Thank you very much for inviting me. Well, I think when it all started, everybody was a little bit in shock, and EU was never meant to be a policeman on values. It was welcoming countries which fulfilled the conditions, and everybody was working on the basis of dialogue, and that was the difference between having wars with each other. But what this Polish crisis shown is that EU had to rapidly learn how to defend itself and people all over the place, not only our nations, but our nation as well, because we are EU citizens, and that EU has obligations towards citizens of all EU member states as a separate power, which we choose because we vote in the elections to the parliament, and then the parliament elects the commission. So they had to redefine themselves and become like more of a true partner of nations in this battle. At the beginning, they were shocked. They didn't have instruments to really think of suing Poland for this particular type of infringement. But we, the citizens of Poland and Polish judges mainly, knocked on their doors for so long that it was obvious for them that not reacting, allowing, for instance, of the whole Supreme Court to be kicked out, etc., would be just the beginning of the end. And they started to see our rebellion, and it was a citizens' rebellion, right? Because we were on the streets and we were very courageous in defending an abstract value. It's very rare for people to go on the streets for abstract values, and yet Poles did in so many places. And if you remember 2017, there was this social movement against it, so they couldn't really ignore it. And then judges started asking preliminary questions about this crisis, and the Commission realized that it has to play a role and has to launch infringements. Otherwise, the whole system of mutual recognition of judgments and mutual protection of citizens will collapse. So yes, we had to wake them up, and yes, we did wake them up. But we also have to realize as citizens of Poland that they will not be our mama and papa, okay? We have to do our job. We have to be vigilant. We have to be involved. Lawyers in Poland have to be involved. Judges in Poland have to be involved in order to keep this battle running. Because people who are in Brussels, they never experienced this. It's an abstract situation for them. They were never harassed themselves for saying something or doing something. So we have to expect from them to be understandable, but at the same time we have to keep on going with our struggle. So all in all, during these years, they were really okay. I mean, people complain about not slow, and maybe, but my view as a person who was there and knocked on these doors, I think that a lot happened, and we, particularly Polish judges, participated immensely in the change in ECJ judgments and attitude of the EU Parliament to this fundamental value. In a way, it was waking them up. For us, it was a little bit too late, maybe because we already had such a regime who wanted to devastate rule of law. But for all the others, it is a wake-up call. I have a pleasure to sit here in this panel, and gentlemen with me are talking about this issue all over the place because they think it's a common issue for all citizens of Poland and the world. So I think, as much as we require more and more, and the battle is not finished, and I think the commissions should come back to the ECJ, to the European Court of Justice, I mean, the Court of Justice of European Union, as we call it now, with unexecuted judgments, and require further means to those judgments to be executed. And even though they are not executed at the moment because of the fake constitutional tribunal pseudo judgments on inferiority of EU law versus Polish law or things like that, I think it's very important that they are there. and other countries can use it, and it's a line of judgments, and it all was there because of Polish judges, but also because of the Commission and the European Parliament. Without infringement cases, we wouldn't have interims, which saved our Supreme Court, for instance. So more to be done, but as a Polish citizen who is in this battle, I'm very grateful for everything which was done so far.
Thank you. And we tend to use a lot of jargon when we discuss about the rule of law and safeguarding it, including infringement procedures, etc. Professor Alemanno, could you perhaps elucidate a little bit, explain what are actually the tools that the EU has, including the financial tools to enforce EU values in member states, and what the tools does it actually use at the moment, and why it uses those and not others?
Yeah, happy to do so. Thank you for having me and for contributing to this conversation about the state of play when it comes to the application and enforcement of rule of law at the European Union level. I would say the European Union, as Paulina anticipated, was not born to become a policeman of what happens in every single European country. However, since the 50s, it contains provisions that somehow allow one institution, which is called the Commission, which is the only institution that really tried to identify and pursue the European interest, to somehow monitor and oversee behaviors happening by the member states within the member state that might somehow depart from the obligations that those countries accepted to abide by, to comply with at the time of accession. And this mechanism is a mechanism that responds to common sense, right? If we live in a condo and we all have to stick to the rules, if there's one neighbor who doesn't stick to the rules because he's not behaving, well, the whole edifice will crumble. In other words, there will be actors free riding on the well-being of that community. And that's the reason why since the 50s, we allow the European Commission to act as a guardian of the treaty, that's the expression, which basically means that it can bring a member state, in that case could be Poland, it could be Italy, it could be Malta, in front of the European Court of Justice after a lot of back and forth at the administrative level, and then ask the court, as the ultimate authority, to define whether there's been a breach or not. We're talking about a declaration that may and has to be complied with by that particular state. We just heard that in the case of Poland, but in the case of other countries, we have some judgments of the Court of Justice which have not been executed. And this is something that the founding fathers already foresaw. So in Article 260, we have a possibility for the Commission to bring back the very same member states in front of the Court of Justice and to ask for financial sanctions. This is quite exceptional in public international law. And I remember studying this 30 years ago as an incredible, unique system that it really created for pathological situations that should never occur. And in the whole history, we only had 6-7 judgments in which the court actually sanctioned economically a member state for not complying with European law. However, if you think about it, the entire use and construct of infringement proceeding has to do with the basic functioning of the European Union, which basically means internal market rules. So if you have a country that is not respecting the market because is, let's say, monopolizing free media or is somehow affecting, let's say, the free allocation and operation of different factors of production, well, we are going to have an economic lens through which the Commission can enter into it. And you can see that here there's a bit of a tension between the nature of the instrument and the nature of the obligations we are discussing today. So the infringement proceeding over time, we have a lot of evidence, has been used less and less and less by the European Commission for a variety of reasons. There's a fantastic study by Dan Kellerman and Tommaso Paone who could prove that how over the last 20 years the Commission has had less appetite to actually act as a guardian of the treaty. And we could actually see also the fact that there was a pattern of member states actually departing systematically and not really facing sanctions. And this is the context against which we could see over the last 2 years the possibility to generalize this idea of financially sanctioning a member state using the leverage of funds as an opportunity to push those countries to comply with European law. And this is the genesis of what we call the Conditionality Regulation, which is a new piece of law that has been agreed as a part of the package that came with the Next Generation EU. So this is ad hoc, a supposedly ad hoc system of transferring a lot of money through grants and loans to the member states in the aftermath of COVID, that had to be somehow attached to this mechanism in order to reassure some countries which were a bit more vocal, like for instance the Netherlands, and they said, well, we agree in this major transfer, or Germany, but the countries, they will run the risk of getting some of their funding somehow, withhold, as Professor Sadurski reminded us. That regulation has a very peculiar story because it was part of a political package. And already at the time in which there was agreement in Brussels by all countries to actually pass this, we could see already Poland and Hungary reserving the right to challenge the regulation in front of the Court of Justice, which led to the February judgment that Professor Sadurski just mentioned to us, in which the court said, well, this is not really a case, is a situation in which this particular regulation is not really acting, is not going beyond the competencies of the European Union. There's no problem at all, so it could be used. But in the meantime, the Commission de facto considered that piece of legislation suspended, so it didn't act. And we had to wait till September to actually see the activation against Hungary for anti-corruption related issues. So the sound management was at stake, and now it got a sort of extension of 2 months, and I'm sure that John Morijn is going to say a few more words. There's a third and last instrument that I would like to mention because it's very fundamental, despite not being legally institutionalized as the infringement proceeding on the conditionality regulation, which is the possibility for the European Commission and Council to actually not validate the Next Generation EU. So here we are talking about basically Hungary not receiving a green light on this big pot of money simply because at the moment it does not provide the guarantees which are required for this kind of situation. This potentially and paradoxically is the most powerful tool the institutions had, because it's a big pot of money that it was kind of awaited to the point that some of these countries already start using this money without receiving it. And now we have a very unique construct used by the Commission and the Council to basically create milestones, so using and embracing the language of management and new public management to basically translate the obligations coming from the treaty and from these judgments which have not been complied with into a sort of discount special package treatment that, if the member states are going to be satisfying, will actually allow the disbursement of funding. So these are the three instruments, the major one that I think are worth mentioning. There is a rule of law report mechanism, which is more about declaratory, is more about peer pressure. It responds to yet another logic. But as you can see, there is a common thread. And the common thread is that none of these mechanisms can be triggered from the bottom up. We cannot, as citizens, as NGOs, as academics, to trigger those instruments. And this is possibly where the original sin is, because unless there will be political will, those mechanisms will not be used to the full use and to their full potential.
Thank you very much. I hope that this is much clearer at the moment. And I would like to zoom in into two very interesting case studies, the Hungarian and the Polish one, starting with Professor John Morijn, who has recently co-authored a very important study on the EU conditionality regulation and the potential of launching it against Hungary. So we are currently at the stage when there is some political will after the April elections, which Viktor Orban's party has won in a landslide. And I would like to ask you, how do you feel about the European Commission's current approach to this mechanism, and whether it has been used to the full potential, and what can happen next?
Thank you very much. And let me first thank you very much for the invitation. It's lovely to be here in Poland. The last time I was here is precisely a year ago, and that was when I was participating in the protests after the Constitutional Tribunal ruling denying the supremacy of European Union law. I remember carrying a European flag. So for me, Poland is I associate it now with a European flag. And also hi to Wojciech. Sorry that you're not here. To answer your question, Anna, I want to first go one step back and say a little bit more about the conditionality regulation, because it's really very important for everybody here to understand that it is not really a rule of law instrument that was thought up as a way to protect the rule of law. It's an instrument as a way to protect the budget. So to understand this instrument, you have to put on the glasses of an accountant and think about, how do I protect my money that I spent somewhere in the best possible way. And specific way, and to understand how this new instrument is structured, you have to sort of follow the stream of money into an EU member state. So every EU member state gets a lot of money from the European Union. That's part of the deal of being a member, right? And it first enters sort of a central audit and management system in a member state, which sort of spreads out and divides all the money. But if there's a lot of corruption or conflicts of interest, and we're talking specifically here about Hungary. In Hungary, corruption with EU money is about 10 times as high as in any other EU member state. So this is a huge problem. If that occurs, you would expect a public prosecutor, in this case in Hungary, to actually follow up on this corruption and bring cases to make sure that this crime is not happening. And once that case is being brought, then there should also be an independent judge who can actually rule on such a case. So these are the three sort of steps that are all covered by this accountant instrument. It's really an accountancy principle. So once you get to that stage, and now we are at that stage with regard to Hungary, it's up to the Commission to propose what are called proportionate appropriate measures. Proportionate appropriate measures. So the question that I answered together with two professors from the United States, Dan Kellerman and Kim Lane-Chappelle, is really, what does that mean? It's really a very legal question. What is a proportionate appropriate measure? And we simply looked at this instrument, which instructs the Commission to look at other law that already exists, specifically with regard to other EU funds. And this other law basically says that if you have a problem that is so systematic and widespread that in fact you can make no safe investment whatsoever into a country, and that is very much the case in Hungary, because you see there's a lot of corruption. There's very few prosecutions of such conflict of interest and corruption cases, and there's, like in Poland, it's less well known, but in Hungary there's also a huge problem of judicial independence. So the whole chain through which EU money can be protected for those accountants in Brussels is very weak in Hungary, and therefore in such cases, if you have widespread problems like in Hungary, current EU law basically instructs the Commission to ask for 100% of EU money to be suspended. I'm stressing the word suspended. It doesn't mean that Hungarian citizens, EU citizens, don't get EU money. It's basically means we will hold this money for you in Brussels until your authorities, the Hungarian authorities, get their act together and make sure that all these three steps that I just described are put in order. So is this what the Commission actually proposed? And I come to the second part of your question, Anja. The answer is sadly no. Out of the 100% that is legally, in my view, an obligation, what they eventually proposed was to cut only 3 structural funds, only by 65%. So this means that about 20% of all of the EU money that would go to Hungary would be suspended. So that's already, so in answer to your question, I'm deeply disappointed about that. And at this stage, it's not even clear whether that suspension will actually be going through. I can talk about it later if you like, but this is the context in which we're now living.
Thank you. Maybe let's quickly zoom into Poland and Professor Sadurski, because we pre-rehearsed this setup a little bit earlier. But Paulina, maybe you could explain what are the milestones that the Polish government agreed on in the Polish recovery plan, and how do you, as a lawyer, assess the current actions of the Polish government regarding those milestones, and whether this could be an effective instrument of bringing back the rule of law standards in Poland?
Maybe before I do answer this question, we should add that this resilience fund, the KPO, as we call it in Poland, is a specific injection of money apart from regular budget control, which can be subject to conditionality. So this was like an ad hoc agreement on all the states, and there was plans which were accepted by the Commission, and in our plan, the government agreed and signed it to get rid of the Bolshevik disciplinary mechanisms against judges, meaning chasing judges politically for the judgments, and particularly judgments which have linked to EU law or judgments of the European Court of Justice. The requirement was also to bring back to office all those judges which were kicked out because of their coherence to EU law, and also to establish a proper disciplinary proceedings, which would mean to get rid of so-called Mazel law, which makes judges who ask preliminary questions to ECJ or who independently adjudicate cases subject to disciplinary harassment. And none of this happened. Zero. We had a table, which if anybody of you is interested, we can share. We have it in our files, where we were comparing the law which was put on the table by President Duda with particular passages in the decisions, in the court decisions, and milestones, because, again, I mean, the side commented that there is a disagreement between judiciary associations and the Commission as to what is the relations between those milestones and what the judges required. But politically, there was 3 milestones in this document. So apart from the fact that all judgments should be executed, these 3 points were put out on the table as refers to the Resilience Fund, and none of them were implemented. The Duda project was a fake packaging of all this, excusez les mots, merde, in the new paper. The disciplinary chamber was dissolved, but the new monster chamber was created based on neo-judges as well, picked up by the politicians. So all sorts of problems which were linked with disciplinary chamber are still there. The judgments given by such an institution will be invalid. The European Court of Human Rights already given interims against this chamber, so there's no issue. This is legally sorted. This is not the chamber that the milestone refers to. None of the judges were officially, legally allowed back. I mean, the 2 of them were subject to specific proceedings, which this neo chamber went through and allowed them back, but it's not really what the system required. Also, one of them was harassed in a different way, so he was put from civil chamber to labor chamber. So it's like putting a dentist to surgery or something like that, because it's a complete different discipline. So it's a harassment not only for him, but for people who are subject to those judgments, because we are, as a state, letting an expert or punishing an expert for being an expert, right? And then we put him in a completely different sphere. The Mazel law is still there, alive and kicking. So everybody who is referring to the judgments of the European Court of Justice can be immediately suspended or subject to disciplinary harassments of all sorts of kinds. And we have our Torquemadas in the Ministry of Justice. The inquisitorial aspect of it is very, very clear. So none of these conditions were fulfilled in the Duda law. The Senate tried to heal a little bit this law and put bits and pieces of what was required, but also not very effective. If you want to look at this table of ours, most of the points which were required are not met even in the Senate version. The only act which was covering those milestones was the draft prepared by Justitia and Porozumienie dla Praworządności, so the NGOs which we are part of, the group, which covered all of those judgments. So it was a dissolving of a disciplinary chamber, a repetition of competitions which pumped up the neo-judges to the Supreme Court and other instances. No vendetta, no personal assessment, just a repetition of all those competitions, those judges being allowed to finish the cases All the judgments were supposed to stay. So it was a very hygienic, formal solution, not delaying the procedures and not canceling any judgments. I think it was a very easy solution comparing it to the mess that is there. It was really trying to put it. So we are in a position where, legally speaking, all of those cases are won by judges. Poland lost around 30 cases now in both tribunals, in Strasbourg, which is the European Court of Human Rights, and Luxembourg, which is the European Court of Justice, and none of those verdicts was executed. Moreover, the politically captured Constitutional Tribunal gave 2 judgments which are totally ridiculous because they consider requirements from those treaties non-binding. So unilaterally, we consider something not binding, something which we signed, something which is higher than our laws according to our constitution, because Article 91 of our constitution says that treaties are higher than local laws. And it's not any independence issue. We voluntarily entered. We wanted this to happen because we want our citizens to travel freely. We want our capital to travel freely. We want our job and entrepreneurs to travel freely. Therefore, we agreed to export certain capacities to an international organization, namely European Union. So we are in a very weird situation where all those judgments are there, the milestones are there, they are signed by the government, and none of them is executed. So we are in breach not only of those judgments, but we are in breach with this obligation, which we double signed, because it's not only the treaty, but also the resilience fund system, which the government agreed.
Professor Sadurski, maybe we could use your broad insight into the workings of constitutional democracy and those who want to destroy it from within to understand actually how this new strategy of sending first the moralist, second the negotiator, and third the accountant to Poland and Hungary. So how this strategy actually works? Do you think it can be effective? What's wrong or what's good or optimistic about those new instruments that we are discussing?
Well, the instruments are clearly not working. That's obvious. If they worked, the situation such as currently in Poland and Hungary wouldn't have occurred in the first place. And if it had occurred, it would be remedied very quickly. So we see, from the point of view, if you like, of the effect of consequences, we see that the toolkit that the EU has, important parts of which have been already discussed, is not effective. And if it is effective, it's effective to a very low degree. So this is under-enforced. And that's not because of the, if you like, defective toolkit, because the toolkit is very comprehensive and makes sense and it's logical. And unfortunately, Poland exhibits the experience of being on the receiving end, so to speak, of the whole suite of tools, ranging from purely political, such as Article 7 procedure, which theoretically may lead to the suspension of the right to vote in the council. On the other side, purely judicial means, such as judgments of the Court of Justice in response to infringement action or in response to questions of preliminary reference from countries, and sort of various hybrid tools in between, the so-called rule of law framework. Now, Poland has undergone each of these procedures, and none really led to any solution or to even arresting, stopping, slowing down this process of backsliding from democracy and from the rule of law in Poland. So it is not a matter of defective toolkit, it is a matter of lack of political will. And we can see that one of the major problems within the EU is that different institutions, which have their roles in these matters, speak, sort of have different voices. So that on the one hand, there is council, which, as one would expect, being the representative of member states, is the most reluctant to use the tools that it has. And I have in particular in mind now Article 7, where both procedures against Poland, against Hungary at different stages are sort of frozen and don't develop well. On the other side, we have Court of Justice of European Union, which has acted really with great degree of courage and integrity. But in the end, it's only a court. It has no power of self-activation. It has to wait for other bodies to activate it. And of course, it has no instrument of enforcement. And somewhere in the middle, we have the Commission, which should be a crucial body here, because as I think Alberto mentioned, it is a guardian of the treaties. And yet the Commission itself speaks with different voices. And we hear, on the one hand, members of the Commission, leading members of the Commission who are more sort of diplomatic and more into realpolitik. And on the other hand, members of the Commission who are much more concerned about the rule of law in Poland, if we are talking about Poland now only. And then sort of, so this is the state of play, that we are experiencing all these, if you like, legal and political actions, plus one should add, even though it is outside the European Union, strictly speaking, but somehow also has effect upon the Union, judgments of the European Court of Human Rights, none of which affected or caused any fundamental change to the good in Poland. And the situation with the milestones, which Ms. Kieszkowska-Knapik nicely described, is a good, or if you like, bad example of how disingenuous the position and the policy of Polish government is. Considering that the milestones themselves are very minimalistic when it comes to the whole set of complaints against Poland, which were made, for example, when launching Article 7. So it's really basically encapsulation of the milestones to a few most drastic issues. And secondly, to the point that the government has actually agreed to it, signed off to it, and now simply fails to live up to its own commitments, to the point in which I believe that maybe we, and in particular public opinion in the West and the decision makers in the Commission, make a fundamental mistake, because they all think that really Polish government would like to receive those funds. But the way I watch its conduct, I come to the conclusion that the opposite is true. It is the last thing that it wants, because now in the pre-election time, the Law and Justice Party and the whole coalition would like to do what it does the best, and that is to find an enemy and fight the enemy. The main enemy is the European Union, which is now being in the public rhetoric identified with Germany. And that is a target of hatred and paranoia, which are the usual tools of this party or parties in the pre-election period. So I think they actually would be quite disappointed if these funds were to be dispensed right now.
Okay, so if the Polish government doesn't really want this money, but it seems that the Hungarian government badly needs it due to the economic crisis, the soaring inflation, and the turmoil in the country. So, Professor Morijn, what is your assessment? Would the conditionality regulation and other elements of pressure against Hungary actually work or not really?
Yeah, very good question. So what, I was talking earlier about this instrument by accountants. Accountants like clarity. So what is one of the main advantages of this instrument? It has very clear deadlines. So when the letter to Hungary was actually sent in September, normally the deadline of 1 month would apply. You see already that immediately the deal that the Commission made with Hungary is not to actually apply that deadline, but give it 2 more months, and said you do get eventually even the 20% of the money that we're now proposing to suspend if you put in place 17 measures. And these 17 measures, the one thing you should remember about them is that, one, they crucially miss judicial independence. So by definition, the Commission has now already said, we will agree to you putting in place something that by definition will always be incomplete. Because as I explained earlier, even also in Hungary, the judicial independence is very important. But we see now evidence of the Hungarian government putting in place measures that the Commission has asked for, like to put in place a new anti-corruption authority, to put in place a new body which would also allow, for example, NGOs to have a bigger role in discussing conflict of interest issues. If you study these measures closely, you see that they're just a complete facade. They're fake. You see, for example, that the independent authority or the authority that should be independent is not independent because they will be completely controlled by the government. You see that the body that will include NGOs does not actually give much power to NGOs because they will not have a majority in them. So it will still be, by the 19th of November, the Commission will have to assess whether these measures will actually live up to the promise that, like in the case of the Polish government, the Hungarian government made. But the difference, and I think that Professor Sadurski pointed it out, between the Polish and the Hungarian government is that the Hungarian government actually really wants the money. So we have much more leverage over the Hungarian government than the Polish government with regard to this. What I suspect will happen, and I'm not at all positive about it, I'm sorry to be depressing late into the weekend, is that in fact these fake measures that are now being put in place by the Hungarian government will be accepted, that the money on the regular budget will be dispersed to the Hungarian government again, but that, like with the case of Poland, they will be transferred into milestones for only the COVID money, which Hungary also really needs. And hopefully there, like in the case of Poland, these will actually be enforced more effectively. But we have to realize that we're talking about a tiny percentage of all the money that goes into Hungary, and that we are squandering tremendous leverage that we now have over the Hungarian government to really put its act together for no particular reason. So sorry to be depressing, but that's my reading of the tea leaves at the moment here.
Professor Alemanno, I would like something positive at the end of our discussion. I would like to ask you what actually we as citizens of the Union can do to correct the tools and the approaches of the European Union's institutions to this crisis.
I'm going to be awful because I'm optimistic by nature, and I'm going to try to show you there's much more we could do. Mm-hmm. And I often ask myself how the European Union would look like today if only civil society had the opportunity to actually leverage on the existing tools available, but a bit hidden, a bit neglected. So let me tell you a little bit where I see the opportunities here. We all seem to agree in this panel, in this room, that we have many tools. So the toolbox is very rich. Some people say we have too many tools. We are creating confusions. And somehow this is deliberate because it gets even more complicated for the enforcers and for us as civil society organizations and academics to understand what's going on. However, we see little political appetite to go all the way. An example, we never had a vote on Article 7. So we never created the opportunity to actually suspend the voting rights, which is the sanction foreseen in the treaty, simply because there was no political willingness to do so. And in a moment in which Poland and Hungary are no longer as close as they used to be, having such a vote could actually lead to surprising effects. So we are renouncing, we are giving up on this opportunity upstream. But this is a bit the kind of scenario in which we should ask ourselves the following question. If the Commission is not doing its job, meaning is not holding accountable the member states as they implement European law, is there a role for civil society to hold the Commission accountable for not doing its job? And I think this is the question we should ask ourselves today. Is there a room for NGOs, academics, grassroots to actually enter into the process? All the tools we have discussed so far are not triggered by us. We cannot trigger them, but we could certainly exercise pressure to make it happen. So there are two major avenues there. There are administrative avenues that the European Union is very generous in offering, but we simply don't use them. I'm talking about the right to petition to the European Parliament. I'm talking about complaints to the European Commission that would allow civil society to activate, but also for the Commission to become a bit braver in actually enforcing those tools all the way. But the Commission didn't feel so much appetite across Europe. And here the dimension is crucial. It's no longer about creating this antagonistic dimension in which the Commission as a policeman goes after Poland or Hungary, but it's a situation in which you have transnational solidarity happening in Europe, and you try to use these channels in the following way. Administratively, you could imagine having organization going from all across Europe and lodging a complaint to the European Commission in order to express solidarity to the judicial colleagues they have here, or to the public administrations, or using other available tools like preliminary references. We cannot set up a case here because Polish judges cannot refer these situations, these cases to the Court of Justice, otherwise they're going to get suspended. But we could imagine and we could create artificially through strategic litigation circumstances in which Poland is somehow involved and refer the matter to the Court of Justice by going through another court. I'm just giving examples of transnational judicial solidarity that might occur in a particular way. And here we have an example in which we have been indirectly or indirectly involved, which is a case which has lodged in September, where for the first time ever, you see European judges associations coming together and challenging the member states' decision to actually greenlight the recovery plan of Poland. This is unprecedented from a variety of points, but certainly the idea that the national judges need to go to the European Court of Justice in order to ask to hold accountable the Council, meaning the 27 governments to do something they should have not done, because the Polish government today doesn't deserve to receive such a money because it's basically in manifest breach of existing obligations, lead us to a situation which is somehow hopeful. It shows that the system has checks and balances. It shows that it is actually possible at the end of the tunnel to see some light, because now basically the national judges coming in this association are giving the opportunity to the court, which cannot self-task itself, we just heard from Wojciech now, to actually hold its authority vis-a-vis everybody, including the 27 government, by saying, hey, you're not responding, you're not complying with my own judgment. You, European Commission, are coming not to us for financial penalty, but it's going to be me saying that here a red line has been finally crossed. So this judgment will be historical for a variety of reasons, but it also shows in the most positive way that the system is presenting checks and balances that allow the system to survive, to prove resilient. So let's keep our thing crossed that this might really lead civil society to also be braver, more courageous, to build more capacity in the future, and to use much more this untapped panoply of tools which are available. We just need to learn and to use them in a more strategic way by coming all together like we're doing today.
So thank you for this learning exercise that we have had here. And now I'm opening a Q&A session. So if anyone has a question, please raise your hand. Jeśli mają Państwo pytanie, proszę o podniesienie ręki. Można zadawać pytania po polsku albo po angielsku i będziemy tłumaczyć. Please, go ahead.
Okay, hello, I'm Iwona Incka from the National Federation of Polish NGOs. I'm also from the European Committee of the Practice Partnership. I think that the most challenge for us right now is monitoring this process. Maybe, I think you know that the National Recovery Plan is still, we don't have monitoring committee. The Minister Puda decided to choose the non-governmental organizations by himself, especially for the fundamental rights and non-discrimination. I think that the most important tool for us is the Code of Conduct of Partnership and other EU regulations, for example, the chapter of the fundamental rights. You didn't say nothing about it, but I think it's the most important for us right now. Thank you.
I think that you're making an important addition. We were talking about the accountant's instrument, but the accountant's instrument is only the icing on the cake. And so there's also another cake underlying it. And there's a lot of existing financial instruments, for example, the way that you get structural funds, that a little bit hidden from, after all, the political debate that we discussed earlier about the adoption of this new accountants instrument, also were strengthened a lot, because now you can only get EU money if, indeed, as you're saying, you comply with the Charter of Fundamental Rights. So this is much broader than accountants' concerns. It could also, for example, lead to questions, which is interesting for you here as well in Poland, that if you use structural funds in such a way as to come to discriminatory practices, for example, against LGBTI, that under this existing underlying instrument about structural funds, you could bring a case, and you could also do that as NGOs, really signal this to the Commission, to say, well, in the way that this is being spent in Poland, or in my case in the Netherlands, in fact, the Charter of Fundamental Rights is being violated. This is a very strong new tool, and that is going to be the next project of Alberto and me when we have time again after the thing in Hungary and Poland has settled down. But you're absolutely making a crucial point that this is something that has huge potential, and we haven't even started to scratch the surface of quite where, how far-reaching that could be.
Okay, thank you.
If I may just add one point, when the Polish document was presented by the government, it wasn't even a law, right? It was just an internal governmental document, and there was a big mistake of a Polish opposition not to enforce proper wording there, and we discussed it with them, and we screamed out that at least they should require this plan to be an attachment to the actual law. They were arguing formally that the law like this is just one line, you accept, you didn't accept. So it was like a pretext not to really get into this, because we knew that such a light wording, like, okay, it's going to be a committee, yeah, right. I mean, and it's going to be just friends and cousins and, I don't know, drivers of those who are at power sitting there and pretending to be independent NGOs, because we know it from Ministry of Culture policy of giving money to NGOs. So we knew how it's going to look like. And to be honest, this is not on the EU side to safeguard this. And our opposition didn't even try. Maybe they would be voted out, but they didn't try.
Well, not to be so pessimistic, that of course we are all frustrated or disappointed with the reaction of European Commission or other European institutions. But let us imagine that there is no reaction at all. So in the communication with the public opinion in Poland, this is crucial that the European Commission is so to speak, strict in the decision about the Polish KPO, yes. And I think that in the general communication process, taking also into account the opinion, as we measure in opinion polls, about pro-European approach of the Polish citizens, also in the question of this conflict between the government and the European Commission. So I think that, we are frustrated, we are disappointed. We should look for new solutions of influencing the European institutions, but let us be a little bit happy with what's going on already. Thank you.
We are almost over time, so please be brief, and then we will continue afterwards.
So maybe just referring to what you said, this is my narrative because we managed to convince them. We are very happy that we succeeded. Maybe it's a subjective way of looking at that because we still have a Supreme Court. Yes, it's just half legal, etc. But there's judges that we can defend. So there is, like Christian said in the previous panel, there is a lot to be proud of. We have a strong social reaction to what happened, and Polish judges, for all of you to know, are probably the most respected judges now in Europe. People didn't realize in other judiciaries that such bravery can be an element of being a judge. And when we were at the March of the 1,000 Robes, and judges came from all over Europe, there was really moving moments when they realized that for some of them during the entire life, they never had such a formative moment in being a judge. So we have a tradition of being very heroic and then dying bravely. Maybe this is not this time. Our judges are amazing. And we try to support them in all ways we can, in all possible ways. And we keep on pushing, happy for what we received and requiring more.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have to finish at the moment. So let's continue the conversation afterwards. Thank you to the panelists and to the audience, and see you soon, offline.
It's not always easy to recognize. It may look like this, or like this. It may be a burden, but it is a responsibility that we embrace nonetheless. But if it means this for one person and this for someone else, maybe it ultimately means being there for one another. It isn't handed to us, but we know where to find it. And how it feels, how it tastes, and what it sounds like when we finally have it. It means different things to different people, but for many, it means everything. And if we all fight for it, it will eventually bring us together.
Ihre Ausreise
Network is, as the name suggests, a network, and it's global. We work all around the world. We're based in the US. We have about 159 partners in the United States right now, and the bulk of our partners are outside, nearly 500 in total.
Atlas Network, it connects people from all over the world, defending the idea of human dignity, defending human rights and personal liberties.
Atlas Network is focusing on, I think, the most important and moral cause in the entire world.
We partner with local innovators, local leaders who understand conditions on the ground in communities facing real challenges. We look at the people from the worldwide freedom movement that are passionate, are ready to make a difference, understand local conditions, and we invest in them.
At Atlas Network, we unleash individual ingenuity to enrich humanity.
The United States does not have a lock on the idea of freedom and liberty. Those ideas are beyond borders.
One of the main goals of Atlas Network is to eradicate poverty around the world, and we do that by investing millions of dollars in our partners' work every year.
Historically, wealthy nations around the world have tried to help low-income countries develop. The way we've been doing it traditionally has not really been working. So there's a movement to do development differently, and that means we need to step back as outsiders and rethink the role that we're playing in helping people in low-income countries achieve their dreams.
We want to make the world a better place. We want to make the world a freer world.
All of us want to leave a legacy and be part of something big to make a better world. This is exactly the work of Atlas Network.
With our growing number of hundreds of successful partners, we're stronger than ever.
Changing the world.
Changing the world.
Changing the world
starts together with us.